In a world filled with the excitement of weddings and the anticipation of a lifetime of happiness, Melanie found herself on the brink of a dream come true. Dressed in her beautiful wedding gown, surrounded by friends and family, she was ready to embark on a new journey with the man she loved. But as the minutes ticked away and the groom was nowhere to be found, the joy and excitement slowly turned into a cloud of anxiety and despair. The fairy tale she had envisioned began to unravel as secrets were revealed, and her perfect day quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Just when it seemed that all was lost, and the future she had imagined was slipping away, an unexpected turn of events brought about a moment of clarity, understanding, and the promise of a second chance. What started as a day of heartbreak and confusion ultimately transformed into a powerful lesson in love, honesty, and redemption. Join us as we take you on this emotional roller coaster from happiness to sadness and back to happiness again. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Melanie felt utterly lost, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and dread. She paced frantically, her heart pounding in her chest, unable to find any semblance of calm. The wedding dress clung to her like a heavy burden, its weight pressing down on her shoulders, almost suffocating her, though the true source of her distress lay elsewhere. Where was Adrian? Only 15 precious minutes remained before the ceremony, and the groom was nowhere to be found. Outside the registry office, a crowd of guests buzzed with anticipation, their excitement slowly giving way to impatience. Melanie struggled desperately to maintain her composure, but it was a Herculean task as anxiety gnawed at her. Her friends, weary from standing in high heels and drained by the endless waiting, were growing restless, eager to snap pictures and flood their social media with joyous moments. The tension rippled through everyone involved. The photographers, tasked with capturing the day's happiness, darted back and forth, their eyes filled with worry as they kept checking if everything was under control. And time ticked on relentlessly, yet Adrian remained conspicuously absent. Each passing second only deepened the furrowed brows of Vanessa and Nicholas, their concern now edging into disbelief. How could someone be late to their wedding? The unspoken question hung in the air, suffocating and heavy. At last, Melanie's mother, her patience worn thin by the agonizing wait, broke the silence. The charged atmosphere suddenly shifted when an old, weathered Buick, as aged as Melanie herself, rolled up to the entrance. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, all eyes fixated on the young man who emerged from the car. Clad in a modest suit and holding a small bouquet of 3 chrysanthemums, he seemed starkly out of place. 2 others, a man and a woman, stepped out of the back seat, their clothes reminiscent of a bygone era, their expressions revealing nothing but quiet dignity. They could have been mistaken for time travelers, their appearance so foreign to the day's grand occasion. Unfazed by the crowd's puzzled stares, the trio ascended the steps with calm confidence. What an unusual theme for a wedding. Someone from the crowd exclaimed, attempting to lighten the mood. The young man smiled, his gaze locking onto Melanie's wide, bewildered eyes as he offered her the humble bouquet. "Hi, my love. I'm so sorry for being late." His voice was soft yet carried a weight of sincerity that silenced the murmurs around them. Melanie's heart skipped a beat as 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Adrian, what is going on? Is this some kind of joke or surprise? She could hardly breathe, the corset of her dress tightening with each anxious breath. Adrian's expression softened as he gently took her hand. "My dear Melanie, this is no surprise, at least, not the kind you're hoping for. It's the reality I've been too afraid to share with you. The truth is, I'm not the wealthy man you might have imagined. My parents are humble, hard-working people. And I'm just a taxi driver who's fallen madly in love with you, hoping to become the man you can spend the rest of your life with." The crowd stood in stunned silence, each guest holding their breath as the weight of Adrian's words sank in. Melanie's heart ached with a confusing mix of emotions: relief, disappointment, love, and fear, each one fighting for dominance in her overwhelmed mind. The moment stretched out, the future suddenly uncertain, yet filled with a raw, undeniable honesty that neither of them could ignore. Melanie's face flushed with a searing anger, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Adrian, how dare you make a mockery of me like this? Is this some sort of twisted prank? A cruel test to see if I'd still marry you if you were penniless and unfortunate?" "Melanie, please listen to me," Adrian pleaded, his voice calm but tinged with desperation. "There's no trick here, no hidden cameras. Just yesterday, you told me you loved me more than anything. Has your love truly faded so quickly? Stop playing games, Adrian. What is this ridiculous charade? Did you bring me here just to humiliate me in front of everyone? Congratulations. You've succeeded. How could I have been so blind not to see you were a con artist from the start?" "This isn't a joke," Adrian responded, his tone now somber and resolute. "Do you remember our boat ride, when you told me you wanted to spend your life with me? Or when I gave you that expensive watch at the cafe, the one I bought with money I worked hard to earn? I knew you'd want a wedding that was anything but simple, so I took out a loan to make it happen." Tears welled up in Melanie's eyes, and she covered her face with trembling hands as silent sobs shook her shoulders. The day she had dreamt of, the day she believed would be the happiest of her life, was spiraling into a nightmare. She had imagined Adrian as the perfect man, thoughtful, kind, and wealthy. She had painted a vivid picture of a flawless future, so much so that her focus on university had slipped, believing she wouldn't need to find a job right away, despite her parents' urging. She had never questioned Adrian's financial status. He drove a sleek, expensive car and lived in a luxurious apartment in the city's most prestigious area. Of course, she assumed he was successful. Why wouldn't she? She came from a prosperous family herself and was beautiful. It only made sense that she would choose a partner who matched her in every way. Adrian reached out to hold her, but Melanie recoiled, pushing him away with a venomous glare. How could you disgrace me like this, in front of all my friends and family, on what was supposed to be my special day? There will be no wedding." With those bitter words, she turned her back on him, her heart shattered, and stormed off, leaving the guests in stunned silence. The bride's and groom's parents exchanged helpless glances, their faces pale with shock, unsure of what to do next. One of Melanie's friends discreetly pulled out her phone, capturing every heartbreaking moment. The guests, still frozen in place, watched in silent horror, knowing they had just witnessed a scene of unimaginable pain and drama, the kind of spectacle that few ever see up close. Melanie's father was the first to snap out of the shock. "Daughter, please come back. Everything can be worked out between a bride and groom." But Melanie, her face streaked with tears, no longer cared to hide her distress. She broke down completely, sobbing as she bolted down the sidewalk. Vanessa hurried after her, while Nicholas, overwhelmed, sank onto the steps of the registry office, lowering his head in defeat. The guests, their eyes now glued to Adrian, watched in stunned silence as he calmly handed the bouquet of chrysanthemums to his parents and then sat down beside Melanie's father. "How are you going to explain all of this?" Nicholas finally asked, his voice hard as he turned to Adrian and met his gaze directly. "You, dear Nicholas, have worked hard your entire life, just like your wife. You provided your daughter with the best, but something crucial was missing: honesty and selflessness." Nicholas's eyes narrowed with fury. "What are you insinuating?" "My daughter is an honest girl. It's you who deceived her, took her to fancy restaurants, drove her around in luxury cars. But why? If you couldn't afford it, why didn't you tell her the truth? I'm certain if she truly loved you, it wouldn't have mattered. Together, you could have built a life. How did we not see through you? You're nothing but a con artist." The venom in his voice was unmistakable as he glared at Adrian. "No one is questioning your daughter's honesty," Adrian replied, his tone steady but tinged with sorrow. "But why did she run away the moment she learned about my situation? I'm not a drug addict, not a drunkard, not a criminal. I earn my living through honest work. It may not be much, but it would be enough for us to live on. And you know what? I'm done justifying myself. I loved your daughter sincerely, but today I saw with my own eyes that she doesn't need me. What she values is money, the image she projects to others, not me." The relatives stood by, listening to Adrian's painful confession, still struggling to grasp what was happening. Melanie's friends were the most bewildered of all. They had seen Adrian shower Melanie with gifts and take her to upscale cafes and restaurants. And now this? Had he suddenly lost everything? Or had he been faking his wealth all along? The situation was murky and confusing. No one moved from their spot near the registry office, as if expecting something else to happen, though they couldn't fathom what. Adrian finally stood up, intending to leave, but his path was abruptly blocked by a woman in a vibrant, colorful dress, Melanie's aunt. "Where do you think you're going? Do you think you can humiliate my niece like this and just walk away? If you loved her, how could you let this happen? Look at all the guests who've been invited. The effort that's gone into this day," her voice rising into a sharp, accusatory tone. Adrian, growing visibly agitated, shot back, "And why don't you ask your beloved niece why she turned her back on me? Just because I'm a simple, working man. No money, no marriage, is that it? Is it so wrong for a girl to want a better life?" the aunt retorted, her voice laced with indignation. "And what about when children come along? She'll have to scrape by on maternity leave. Is that such a crime? This isn't calculation, it's common sense. Did she ever lie to you about who she was? Did she pretend to be someone else?" Adrian opened his mouth to argue but found himself at a loss for words. Just then, Adrian's mother, Caitlin, stepped forward, her demeanor calm and composed. "You should know, Adrian never intended to disgrace his future wife. He fell in love, truly and deeply, for the first time in his life. He's not to blame for what happened today. Melanie is." "What nonsense are you spewing?" Blaming Melanie, the aunt shot back, her anger flaring again. Of course, in every mother's eyes, her son is a saint, and the daughter-in-law is the villain. But Caitlin wasn't deterred. "We saw Melanie with another man at a cafe about a month ago," she began, her voice steady but laden with sorrow, freezing Nicholas in his tracks and rendering Melanie's aunt speechless. "We were there with mutual friends, sitting just a table away. Melanie didn't notice us, but we overheard her conversation. She was telling this young man that she loved him deeply, that she was only marrying Adrian for his money. We couldn't hide this from our son." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, the truth twisting the already painful situation into something even darker and more tragic. The guests, who had been watching in stunned silence, now looked on with a mix of shock and pity, realizing that the day's drama had far more layers than any of them had anticipated. The guests were frozen in shock, their minds reeling from the unexpected turn of events. No one could have anticipated such a revelation, not even Adrian, who felt a wave of discomfort wash over him at his mother's words. He gently took Caitlin by the elbow, trying to guide her away from the scene, but she remained steadfast. "Adrian didn't speak to us for a week after learning the truth, and then he declared he would still marry Melanie. We encouraged him to take this step, to reveal his financial situation to her. We never imagined she would react like this, fleeing from her wedding. Doesn't this prove that she never truly loved our son, that all she cared about was our money?" Adrian, his face a mixture of pain and resignation, urged his mother once more. "Mum, let's go," he said quietly, leading her toward the car. The guests, shaken by the day's events, began to disperse, leaving Melanie's father, Nicholas, standing in a daze, unable to reconcile what had just happened. "How could I have raised such a daughter?" he muttered to himself, lost in a fog of disbelief and sorrow, his mind unable to process where he was or what he was doing. The comforting words of his loved ones fell on deaf ears. Nicholas had loved Melanie deeply and had envisioned a bright, joyful future for her. But now, everything he had hoped for had crumbled to dust. 3 months passed since that ill-fated wedding, and Melanie's family found themselves ensnared in a relentless spiral of misfortune. Nicholas, stricken by the emotional toll, suffered a devastating stroke, leaving the left side of his body paralyzed. The once vibrant and hard-working man was now confined to his bed, a shadow of his former self. The family was shaken to its core. Vanessa, abandoning the management of their store, hastily hired a new manager so she could devote herself entirely to caring for her ailing husband. Melanie, meanwhile, was in the midst of her final year at university, anxiously awaiting her exams, yet the dark cloud of despair hanging over her family seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. The store, which had once thrived under Vanessa's attentive care, began to suffer. Loyal customers, disheartened by the absence of the friendly and approachable owner, stopped visiting as often. Sales plummeted, and with revenue drying up, Vanessa was forced to make difficult decisions. 2 employees were let go, leaving only an elderly friend and a young woman of 25 to manage the dwindling business. Even with the reduced staff, the workload became overwhelming, as the schedule was far too demanding for just 2 people. After Melanie's marriage fell apart, Nicholas, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, distanced himself from his responsibilities and began giving away money recklessly, as if trying to prove to the world his generosity and selflessness. But when his health failed and the family found themselves on the brink of financial ruin, those he had helped vanished without a trace. Vanessa, at her wits' end, struggled to manage the situation. She had never been involved in financial matters, and now, with all her energy focused on Nicholas's rehabilitation, she had no time or resources left to address the growing pile of bills. Though some relatives offered assistance, they had their own lives to manage, and the full weight of caring for her husband fell squarely on Vanessa's shoulders. Melanie, for her part, remained distant from the family's struggles. Throughout her life, she had been preoccupied with her studies and her social life, leaving her parents to handle the business on their own. Nicholas and Vanessa, not wanting their daughter to endure the hardships they had faced, had always hoped she would pursue a prestigious career far removed from their trade. But Melanie's carefully laid plans disintegrated in an instant. She found herself at a loss, unsure of how to help her parents, and perhaps unwilling to do so. She showed little interest in caring for her father or stepping in to support the family business. As if her personal life wasn't already in tatters, Melanie's close friends seemed to have evaporated. Once content to bask in the glow of her carefree, affluent life, they now abandoned her in her time of need. Without money or time, Melanie was left feeling isolated and betrayed, wallowing in self-pity. Her classmates whispered behind her back, spreading rumors and gossip. She plays the victim, but the truth is, she wanted to have it all, marry a rich guy and keep a lover on the side. It backfired, and now she's to blame for her father's stroke. Sympathy from others was in short supply. Even Adrian, who she thought might seek her out for reconciliation, remained silent, ignoring her calls and messages. Her mother, Vanessa, heartbroken and overwhelmed, hadn't spoken to her daughter in days, leaving Melanie alone to face the wreckage of her once promising life. At the end of June, Melanie finally received her university diploma, a moment she had once eagerly anticipated. Yet when she arrived home, the excitement had long faded. She flopped onto her bed, her diploma tucked away in her bag, and picked up her phone without saying a word. The silence in the house was thick with unresolved tension. "Melanie, could you please go get some groceries?" her mother called out from the other room, her voice weary. Melanie's eyes narrowed as she responded, her tone defiant. "Don't you have anything else to say to me?" Her mother's reply was blunt, devoid of the usual warmth. "Melanie, we haven't had milk or bread in the house for 2 days." Melanie felt a surge of indignation. "So does that mean the bread is more important to you than your daughter's diploma?" Not long ago, such an exchange would have been unthinkable. Her mother emerged from the other room, her face pale, her expression one of deep sorrow. "You know, daughter, I didn't realize what a terrible person I had raised. It's painful for me to accept that you're my child." Melanie's heart raced with a mixture of shock and anger. "Wait, did you just call me a terrible person? Are you out of your mind? I just graduated and got my diploma, and instead of congratulations, I'm sent on an errand to the store." Her mother's voice was calm but laden with years of unspoken hurt. "You're almost 23 years old, Melanie, yet you still think like a child. It was a huge mistake for your father and me to spoil you, to plan your wedding without preparing you for the real world." Melanie's face flushed with fury. "So now you're going to blame me for being dumped by Adrian?" Her mother looked away, her voice barely above a whisper, careful not to disturb her sleeping husband. "Yes, I am blaming you, and not just for that. Your behavior, your selfishness, your lies caused your father's stroke and my heart to nearly give out. You were about to get married, and yet you started an affair." Melanie's hands shook as she tried to hold back tears. "Mum, I've explained this to you over and over. I had no relationship with that guy. It was all business. I couldn't have known Adrian's parents would be there. I didn't confess anything to that guy. Why can't you believe me instead of Caitlin? He messaged me on Instagram, asking for advice on choosing furniture. I'm a beginner designer, so of course I agreed to help. We met up, I gave him some tips, and he wanted to thank me by inviting me to a cafe. We sat, had coffee, and talked. He started flirting, and I made it clear I was getting married soon, so he shouldn't expect anything. Then he began asking me all sorts of questions, like whether I could ever love him. I told him no and started getting ready to leave. Then he had the nerve to ask if I could pay for myself. I told him, "Why would you invite a girl to a cafe if you don't even have the money to pay?" He got defensive, saying, "Why is money so important to you girls? Is that all that matters in life?" And yes, I told him money is important to me, and my fiancé is wealthy, that's why I chose him. Her mother listened, her face a mask of exhaustion and disappointment. "You see, Melanie, this is the problem. You speak as if money is the only thing that matters, and maybe that's why Adrian left. He saw that your love was for wealth, not for him. And now, after everything, after all the pain and loss, you still don't understand what's truly important." Melanie opened her mouth to argue but found herself at a loss for words. The weight of her mother's accusations, the harshness of her words, struck her deeply. At that moment, Melanie realized how much had changed, how far she had fallen from the life she once thought was hers to command. The diploma she had worked so hard for now felt like a hollow achievement, overshadowed by the harsh realities of her fractured family and the consequences of her choices. "Why has money become your top priority?" Melanie, her mother, asked, her voice laced with disappointment. "We didn't raise you in poverty. You always had everything you needed and wanted." Melanie sighed, feeling misunderstood. "Mom, you're being strange," she replied. "The money represents freedom. Sure, it can't buy everything, but a good income means I can live life on my terms, not like you and Dad, working tirelessly from dawn till dusk in the store. If we'd been better off financially, Dad wouldn't have been so stressed about the money we spent on that wedding." Vanessa felt a surge of anger but quickly suppressed it, her expression turning unusually calm. "Your father didn't have a stroke because of the money we spent on the wedding. He was heartbroken when he realized what kind of selfish, two-faced daughter we had raised." Melanie's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you accusing me of that again?" she exclaimed. "At least I was honest with Adrian. He's the one who lied to me, pretending to be rich." But even as she spoke, Melanie found herself lost in thought, torn between her emotions and the harsh reality that had unraveled. She couldn't comprehend why Adrian had kept his true financial status a secret. As the day dragged on, she wrestled with feelings of betrayal, confusion, and anger, trying to maintain her composure amidst the storm of emotions. "I know my worth, and I'm not about to marry any liars or fools," she thought to herself, trying to justify her feelings. But who's being deceitful here? Who's the one acting selfish? Enough of this. Melanie Vanessa cut in, her tone stern and unyielding. "I'm done coddling you. Tomorrow morning you're coming to the store with me, and you'll work as a salesperson until we turn a profit." "Me? A salesperson? I don't know how to do that. Have you even asked me what I want?" Melanie protested, her voice rising in frustration. "I didn't ask, and I'm not going to," her mother replied coldly. "You haven't once asked how much it's cost to rehabilitate your father these past 2 months, how I've managed to pay the salespeople, or how I've kept everything running. All you think about is yourself." With that, Vanessa placed some money on the table and walked out of the room, leaving Melanie alone with her thoughts. Tears welled up in Melanie's eyes as she headed to the nearby grocery store. The thought of being a salesperson filled her with dread. Imagining herself eating a simple sandwich for lunch and gossiping with other workers felt like the end of the world. Her once bright and beautiful life seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. Would she have to abandon her dreams of an interior design career? Who would hire her now, with nothing but a diploma marked with C's and no experience? She knew she needed to gain experience, but she also knew she couldn't afford to work for free, and earning a decent income right away seemed like a distant fantasy. The next day, Melanie reluctantly accompanied her mother to the store, while Aunt Polly stayed home to care for her recovering father. The store, situated at the intersection of 2 busy streets, was a lifeline for the family, preventing it from closing its doors. Customers had always appreciated the quality and variety of goods offered, but competition from a nearby shopping center made it increasingly difficult to stay afloat. The shopping center's vast departments sold low-quality clothing at cheap prices, attracting customers despite the inferior products. During a recent family meeting, it was decided to implement a system of discounts for regular customers and to explore other marketing strategies to boost sales. As they entered the store, Vanessa was greeted warmly by Rebecca, her friend and one of the store's longtime salespeople. "Hello, Vanessa. I'm so happy to see you," Rebecca said with a smile. "Hello, Rebecca," Vanessa replied, nodding toward Melanie. "I've brought you a new employee. Rebecca, I have just one request: treat Melanie not as my daughter, but as any other person who has come here to learn the ropes." Rebecca's smile widened as she glanced at Melanie. "Of course, we'll teach her everything she needs to know," she assured Vanessa. Then her tone grew more serious as she continued, "Vanessa, while you're here, I need to tell you that we've sold out of the old stock quickly, but the new models aren't moving as fast. The fabric is natural wool, but the color is a bit off a dull gray that not many people like. We haven't sold a single suit this week. Customers keep asking for classic dark gray or black. I think you should negotiate with the supplier and order a few batches of pants and suits that will sell." Vanessa nodded thoughtfully, absorbing Rebecca's words. "Thank you, Rebecca. I'll get in touch with the supplier and see what we can do. For now, let's focus on training Melanie and getting her up to speed." As Melanie listened to the exchange, a sense of dread settled over her. The reality of her new situation was sinking in, and she couldn't help but feel like she was being dragged into a world she didn't belong to, a world far removed from the dreams she had once cherished. Melanie listened in horror as her mother discussed the details of fabric types and sizes with the salesperson. What sizes? What wool fabric? She had studied design, learned about different fabrics, and mastered color combinations, but it was one thing to work in a controlled environment, meeting clients on her terms, and quite another to deal with people day in and day out, trying to please every single one of them. She remembered the discomfort she'd felt as a child, watching her parents transform into overly cheerful, caring individuals whenever a customer walked through the door. They would put on their best smiles, engage in friendly chit-chat, and ensure each customer left satisfied. But once home, her parents would barely speak to each other, drained and exhausted. As a child, Melanie hadn't understood why they were so tired after all. Running a store didn't seem like the hardest job in the world. It wasn't until years later that she realized how emotionally exhausting it could be to work with people day in and day out, especially when you took your job seriously. Is this what my mother wants to teach me? To be a people pleaser, Melanie muttered under her breath, not realizing she had wandered into the men's clothing section. She found herself surrounded by shirts and sweaters, feeling lost and overwhelmed. "Are you picking something out for your husband?" a pleasant voice asked from behind her. Melanie turned to see a cheerful salesperson smiling at her. "Your beloved might like this cashmere sweater. It's warm, comfortable, and very cozy. We have all sizes and 5 colors to choose from." Melanie stammered, unsure of how to introduce herself. Was she the owner's daughter or the new employee? The salesperson, sensing her hesitation, smiled kindly. "I won't bother you. Take your time to choose. When you're ready, just let me know, and I'll be here to help." Melanie felt a wave of relief. How nice it is, she thought to herself, that the salespeople in our store are so polite and helpful. The interaction lifted her spirits, dispelling the gloom that had been hanging over her. For the first time in her life, the idea of working as a salesperson didn't seem so bad. With a newfound sense of purpose, she left the men's section and headed back to her mother. "Mum, what should I do?" "I'm ready to work," Melanie announced with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. Vanessa looked at her daughter as if she'd seen a ghost. The always reluctant and dissatisfied Melanie was suddenly taking the initiative. It was almost too good to be true. "Everyone, meet my daughter," Vanessa said, turning to the other women in the store. "Rebecca, you already know her well. And Greta, you've just started working here recently, so I haven't introduced you yet." The women exchanged smiles and friendly greetings. "Nice to meet you," they said, laughing at the sudden formality. Greta, who had mistaken Melanie for a customer earlier, laughed along with them. "Nice to meet you too," she said, explaining to Vanessa that she had offered Melanie men's pullovers, thinking she was a shopper. Vanessa couldn't help but smile as she observed the interaction. She knew her daughter had a difficult personality and wasn't under any illusions about Melanie's potential as a salesperson. But the past few months had worn Vanessa down so much that she was willing to see where this surprising change might lead. Melanie, too, was caught off guard by how things had unfolded. Suddenly, she found herself selling plus-size clothing, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she experienced an unexpected surge of energy and determination. She pushed all her doubts aside and focused on learning the ropes. "These are single-breasted jackets. These are double-breasted. And these," Greta explained, guiding Melanie through the women's clothing department, "are buckle fabric jackets. They used to be insanely popular here." "What's the maximum size for these jackets?" Melanie asked, trying to absorb as much information as possible. "We always order tunics and dresses in certain models up to XL," Greta replied, her tone matter-of-fact. Melanie's face betrayed her surprise. "Really? I didn't think plus-size clothes were that popular." Greta nodded. "Oh, they are. There's a huge market for them. Many women appreciate fashionable, well-made clothes in larger sizes. It's all about making everyone feel good in what they wear." For a moment, Melanie was silent, processing this new information. She hadn't given much thought to plus-size fashion before, but now, standing in the middle of her family's store, she realized how much she still had to learn, not just about the business, but about people and what they valued. Her preconceived notions were being challenged, And for the first time, she felt a glimmer of understanding about what her parents had been trying to teach her all along. Your parents possess a rare and insightful wisdom, a kind of intuition that allows them to steer clear of anything that doesn't hold value. They wouldn't waste their time or energy on outdated or irrelevant items. They're far too shrewd for that. Just consider this: most fashion brands stop at size L, as if elegance and modern style have no place beyond those limits. But women of all sizes, of all shapes and forms, have the right to feel beautiful, sophisticated, and on trend. And it's not just women, men too deserve to feel confident and stylish, no matter their size. We've built a loyal customer base, a community of people who don't care to lose weight, but who care deeply about how they present themselves to the world. They want to drape themselves in a fashion that speaks to their inner beauty and unique style. And it's our privilege, no, our duty to meet that need. It's not our place to judge their choices, to question their lifestyles. We're here to honor their desires and to celebrate them exactly as they are. After all, there are so few places in this town where you can find clothes that are not only of high quality, but also truly fashionable in larger sizes. Sure, online shops are lurking around every corner, constantly vying for attention. But what they lack and what we excel in is the human touch. When a person walks into our store, they aren't just another sale, another transaction. We treat them with care, we listen to their needs, and we do everything we can to make them feel seen, heard, and appreciated. Yes, our primary goal is to sell. We're a business, and there's nothing shameful in that. But we go beyond the basics. We're not just selling clothes, we're selling confidence, dignity, and a sense of belonging. And who better than a dedicated, passionate seller to guide our customers? We show them what suits them best, how to wear it, how to mix and match with flair, and how to step out feeling like the best version of themselves. "Look over here," Greta said, her voice filled with enthusiasm as she pointed toward the women's clothing section. Take this dress with a basque, for example. At first glance, it might seem like just a decorative touch, something purely aesthetic. But it's so much more than that. The basque subtly enhances the balance between a slender waist and fuller hips, creating a silhouette that is both flattering and empowering. Or take a look at this other dress. Pair it with a bold, vibrant scarf, matching shoes, and a sleek, stylish bag, and you've got a completely different outfit, a whole new look that tells the world who you are. Melanie stood there, captivated, her mouth slightly agape as she absorbed Greta's insights. It was as if a light had suddenly been switched on inside her. She realized, perhaps for the first time, how much she had underestimated the work of a clothing store associate and how much she had overestimated her knowledge. Greta wasn't revealing any earth-shattering secrets. She wasn't imparting knowledge that Melanie hadn't encountered before. After all, Melanie had always been fashion conscious. She had followed trends religiously, spent countless hours shopping with friends, and prided herself on her ability to put together a chic ensemble. But Greta was opening her eyes to a new dimension, a world beyond the superficial. She was teaching her the art of truly connecting with customers, of making them feel valued and special, of ensuring that they left the store with a sense of satisfaction, even if they didn't end up buying anything. "I genuinely enjoy working here," Greta confided during their lunch break, her voice softening as she spoke from the heart. "I have a deep respect for your mother, and that's why I stayed when others chose to leave." Not many store owners would go as far as to sell their precious jewelry just to make sure their employees were paid. That kind of dedication and loyalty is rare. It's something worth standing by. "My mom is a strange woman," Melanie muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as a torrent of thoughts flooded her mind. "Mom didn't say anything about selling her jewelry. Why is it that I always have to hear these things from others? And now that I think about it, I hadn't even noticed that Mom no longer wears her earrings or ring. What kind of daughter am I? I've been so wrapped up in my world, so consumed by my struggles, that I didn't even see the sacrifices she was making. I can't even study properly. earn a decent living, or manage to get married. I'm a failure in every sense of the word. From that moment on, Melanie's part-time job at the family store became something much more significant: a mission, a calling. She was no longer just working for the sake of working. She was driven by a newfound determination, a burning desire to prove herself, to make amends for all the ways she had failed. She began working harder than ever before, pouring herself into every task with a fervor she hadn't known she possessed. She spent several days each week alongside Greta, absorbing her wisdom and learning from her expertise. She spent several more days with Rebecca, soaking in her knowledge and skills. She allowed herself only one day off each week, a day she reluctantly took, knowing that every moment away from the store was a moment lost. Melanie threw herself into serving customers with a new level of dedication. She sorted and steamed clothes in the warehouse with precision and care that bordered on obsession. She dressed mannequins with an artist's eye, ensuring that each display was a perfect representation of the store's style and ethos. She meticulously monitored the size grid of the most popular models, ensuring that no customer would ever leave disappointed because their size wasn't available. But perhaps most importantly, she took on the responsibility of promoting the store online, a task that Vanessa had previously handled alone. Melanie knew next to nothing about marketing or PR. The world of social media, with its algorithms and analytics, was foreign and intimidating to her. But her fierce determination to restore the family business to its former glory was stronger than any fear or doubt. She became the driving force behind the store's online presence, pouring her heart and soul into every post. She carefully curated photos of the latest arrivals, capturing them in the best possible light. She detailed product features with a blend of creativity and precision, making each item come alive on the screen. She responded to customer inquiries with warmth and attentiveness, ensuring that every interaction left a positive impression. Vanessa watched her daughter's transformation with a mix of pride, relief, and a touch of melancholy. She saw how Melanie interacted with customers with a level of patience and politeness that she had never shown before. She saw how her daughter had mastered the intricacies of working the cash register, a task that had once seemed insurmountable. Despite all the turmoil their family had faced recently, the financial struggles, the emotional upheavals, Vanessa found solace in her daughter's late-blooming maturity. Melanie was no longer the self-absorbed, distracted young woman she had once been. She no longer spent hours sending voice messages to her friends, her voice filled with the trivialities of youth. She no longer endlessly scrolled through her news feed, lost in a sea of meaningless updates. She no longer snorted at every small request, her impatience and irritation bubbling to the surface. Instead, she devoted her only day off to spending quality time with her father, a man who had silently borne the weight of their family's struggles. As Melanie threw herself into her work, she found a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going even when the weight of her failures threatened to crush her. She wasn't just working to keep the store afloat, she was working to redeem herself, to prove that she was more than her past mistakes. And as she did, she began to see the world and herself in a new light. The store, once just a place to earn a paycheck, became a sanctuary, a place where she could rebuild her shattered sense of self-worth. And in the process, she discovered a strength and resilience she never knew she had. Vanessa often found herself haunted by the decisions she had made regarding Melanie's life. She regretted pushing her daughter into a hasty marriage, not allowing her the time to truly get to know the young man she was dating, and even more so, not taking the opportunity to meet his parents. At the time, marriage seemed like the perfect solution, a way to knock all the frivolity out of Melanie's head and force her to grow up, to become a serious person. Vanessa believed that by giving her daughter the responsibility of a family, and perhaps soon the responsibility of a child, Melanie would finally mature. How wrong she had been. The painful truth that gnawed at her was that no one can change another person. Change must come from within, or be driven by circumstances beyond our control. As the months passed, life continued its steady, uncertain course. Nicholas, slowly but surely, began to regain some feeling in the left side of his body. Though full recovery was still a distant hope, the progress was a beacon of joy in what had been a dark time for the family. The doctor's relentless efforts and Vanessa's unwavering care were finally yielding results. Yet, amidst the happiness, Vanessa couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. She wondered, with a heavy heart, if would Melanie have grown into a better version of herself if not for this terrible misfortune that had befallen their family. On Monday morning, the store was unusually quiet, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by a peaceful calm. Melanie and Greta were busying themselves with picking out outfits for the mannequins, their laughter echoing softly through the store. "Good morning, girls." An elderly woman entered the store, her face lighting up with a warm smile. "Good morning," the two saleswomen responded almost in perfect unison, their spirits lifting at the sight of a customer. "I'm so glad you opened at 9, the woman said, her smile never fading. "I've been suffering from insomnia for a few nights now, waking up at 5 in the morning with nothing to do. I thought a walk and a bit of shopping might help calm my nerves." Greta stepped forward, her tone gentle and inviting. "What might make you feel better today? A blouse, a dress, or perhaps a warm cardigan?" The elderly woman sighed, her expression growing thoughtful. "I have a bit of a dilemma. I need a dress for a wedding, and it has to be XL. I was looking around yesterday at the shopping center next door." She nodded towards the neighboring building, but all they offered me were dark, somber colors. Greta's eyes softened with understanding. "What kind of dress styles do you usually go for? Is there anything you'd like to highlight or perhaps something you'd prefer to keep covered?" The woman chuckled softly, a wistful note in her voice. "Oh, girls, when you're as young and slender as you are, you should show off everything. But at my age, it's better to cover up a bit. I'm looking for something light and cheerful, something that makes me feel good. After all, it's my only grandson's wedding. If you can find me a dress with a nice, light wrap, I'd be over the moon." Greta and Melanie set to work, showing the woman every fancy dress in her size, each one carefully selected to match her preferences. The elderly customer looked over each option with a discerning eye, her interest piqued. Understanding that this might take some time, Melanie decided to strike up a light conversation. "So, the big day is coming up soon? And is the bride a beauty?" Melanie asked, her tone bright and conversational. The woman smiled, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. "There are still 3 weeks until the celebration, but I like to be prepared well in advance. My grandson's name is Adrian. As for the bride, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet. I just arrived 3 days ago. You see, I live quite far from here. And my son was kind enough to send me a plane ticket. He said, 'Mom, you'll celebrate your grandson's wedding and then stay with us for a month, so here I am.'" As the woman tried on dress after dress, she found herself growing increasingly uncertain. "Girls, I feel like I've put you through so much trouble already. I'm sorry, but it's been so long since I've bought something special for myself. There just hasn't been much reason to dress up in my old age. But my son insists that the wedding will be a grand affair. The bride, you see, comes from a very wealthy family." Melanie smiled reassuringly, her tone soothing. "Please don't worry, you're not troubling us at all. And it's wonderful that the bride is well off. A bit of financial stability can certainly help reduce some of the challenges in married life." The elderly woman sighed, her smile fading just a little. "Oh dear, money isn't always a guarantee of happiness in marriage. My son, for example, he used to be such a calm, reasonable man, but lately I don't recognize him anymore. He's become so nervous, so agitated. His wife, well, she squeezes everything out of him for the sake of living a luxurious life. Caitlin, that's her name, loves to visit the most expensive resorts and wears nothing but the finest clothes. But at least one thing is good: my grandson is a decent young man. He helps his father with the business and does what he can to keep things running smoothly." As the woman spoke, Melanie felt a pang of empathy. The conversation reminded her of the delicate balance of relationships and the pressures that money and expectations can place on a family. She glanced at Greta, who was carefully adjusting a dress on a hanger, and then back at the elderly woman, whose eyes held a lifetime of wisdom and experience. At that moment, Melanie realized that every customer who walked through their doors carried with them a story, a burden, a hope for something more. And in their small way, she and Greta were helping to lighten that load, if only just a little. As the elderly woman stood in front of the mirror, her eyes slightly blurred from age, she hesitated. "It can't be a cone." "Cohen? I'll take this one. The pink color refreshes well, and the fabric is so pleasant to the touch," she finally decided, her reflection looking satisfied with the choice. But as Melanie watched her, a sudden, intense wave of emotion surged within her, overwhelming her with a deep, pounding ache that she couldn't suppress. The elderly woman noticed the shift in Melanie's demeanor and looked at her with concern. "Are you feeling okay, dear?" she asked gently, her voice filled with genuine care. Melanie struggled to hold back her tears but couldn't manage it. She quietly sobbed, "I'm sorry. I'm just so tired." The woman's expression softened even more, her heart reaching out to the young girl. "Don't cry, sweetheart. Life will bring you your celebration, your happiness, and you will get married when the time is right," she said soothingly, trying to comfort Melanie with her maternal wisdom. But Melanie, lost in the throes of her emotions, couldn't stop herself. "You know," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of her unspoken pain, "I was supposed to have a wedding, but it fell apart. Because of me." The elderly woman reached out and gently took Melanie's hand in hers, her touch warm and comforting. "Don't cry, dear," she said softly. "Let's finish up with my purchase, and then we'll step outside. You can tell me everything, and we'll figure it out together." 10 minutes later, Melanie found herself sitting beside Adrian's grandmother, pouring out her heart. She told her everything about the day her life unraveled, her father's stroke, how her mother had thrown herself into caring for her husband with every ounce of her strength, and how Melanie had taken up work at the store to help her parents. She spoke of the guilt, the pressure, and the overwhelming sense of failure that had consumed her since that fateful day. "My dear, to say that I'm shocked is an understatement, Mrs. Sullivan said, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I am so very sorry about your father. But tell me honestly, did you cheat on Adrian?" "No, of course not." Melanie's voice cracked with desperation, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I'm telling you all of this not because I want to get Adrian back. It's too late for that. He's getting married. I'm just devastated that I was slandered in front of everyone I care about, my relatives, my friends, even my father, who couldn't bear such shame. My parents always saw me as irresponsible, and this just confirmed their worst fears. I couldn't convince them that I didn't confess my love to a stranger. It was just some ridiculous coincidence. I agreed to meet with someone who needed my designer's advice. I didn't see any harm in it. And why on earth would I go to the most popular cafe in town if I were a cheater, just before my wedding?" Mrs. Sullivan listened intently, her face thoughtful. "What's the name of this cafe?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's just called Pizza," Melanie explained. "It opened about a year ago. They serve delicious food at reasonable prices. We call it the Student Cafe because it's always full of students." Mrs. Sullivan paused for a moment, then asked gently, "Melanie, do you still love Adrian?" Melanie hesitated, her thoughts swirling with a mix of emotions. "I think I do," she finally admitted, her voice soft and reflective. "But I'm giving the word love a slightly different meaning now. I know you're going to ask me why I ran away from the wedding if I loved him. The truth is, I was preparing myself for a happy life, with the man I thought I loved. As Melanie spoke, she couldn't help but reflect on the reality of her situation. I won't lie. She thought to herself, Adrian was a wealthy man. I believed that marrying him would make me financially independent of my parents, and I could live as I pleased. Before my father's stroke, we never had financial worries. But my parents always warned me that I would need to work hard to become a true professional and live a life without worries. Now I understand that they were right about everything, but back then, I just imagined that half of my life would be spent working towards that goal. While there were so many other interesting and new things around me. Melanie's voice grew quieter as she continued, Your grandson came to the wedding like a jester, saying that he was completely broke and that we would live on his salary as a taxi driver. I just didn't expect such a turn of events. I had told everyone about my smart, beautiful, and well-off fiancé. And then, this happened. I understand that in your eyes I must seem like a foolish, selfish person who wanted to settle comfortably in life. Maybe that's true. But I'm just so tired of it all. Mrs. Sullivan listened with a patient, understanding expression. You have so many thoughts running through your head, Melanie, she replied kindly. But believe me, the most important thing is that you've recognized your own mistakes. We all make them, my dear. My son Brandon, for instance, is a successful entrepreneur and a self-sufficient man. But even he is under his wife's thumb. And he never said a word to me about this story. But you know, Melanie, our conversation isn't over yet. Let's meet tomorrow morning. I think there was a reason my feet led me to your store today, she said with a warm smile. Melanie said goodbye to Adrian's grandmother and returned to work, feeling an unprecedented sense of relief wash over her. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her soul. But just as she began to feel a glimmer of hope, she heard someone calling her name. A handsome stranger had pulled up too close to the sidewalk in his car and was gesturing for her to get in the front seat. Melanie ignored him and continued on her way, determined not to be distracted by any more complications. The stranger, however, was persistent. He jumped out of the car and quickly caught up to her. Hey, Melanie, do you remember me? Melanie turned to face him, her expression wary. Hello, she said cautiously. No, I don't remember you. What do you want, she asked, her voice edged with suspicion and fatigue. Wow, calm down. Why so gloomy so early in the morning? I just wanted to have a conversation with you, the man said, his tone light, trying to diffuse the tension. I'm one of Adrian's friends. My name is Marcus. I was late to your wedding and missed all the drama. Adrian told me everything that happened afterward. I've been trying to reach you on social media, but you haven't responded. So I had no choice but to catch you in person. You do know that Adrian is getting married soon, right? I'm happy for him, Melanie responded, her voice flat and emotionless. But he doesn't love his fiancée, Marcus persisted, his voice tinged with urgency. His mother is pushing him into this marriage. Things haven't been going well for his father's business, and Crystal, well, she's the daughter of a big shot in the administration. At first, Adrian thought she was nice, she's pretty and all, but after spending time with her, he realized they had nothing in common. He's trapped, Melanie, and he's not happy about it. Well, there's nothing I can do to help, Melanie replied, her tone sharp. Let him play the same game with her that he did with me. Maybe she'll wise up and leave him on her own. Melanie, I'm serious, Marcus pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. You need to tell Adrian that you still love him. If you do, there won't be a wedding. He's setting himself up for misery, and I just want to save him from making a huge mistake. Marcus, why do you think I still love him? Melanie's voice was cold, her eyes hard as she turned to face him. And why on earth would I want to save him from a marriage that seems so advantageous? Do you think I'd believe either of you, especially after what Adrian pulled at our wedding? I'm not in the mood for more games. Goodbye, she said firmly, turning on her heel and heading back towards the store. Melanie, wait, Marcus called after her, his voice rising with frustration. Do you even know how much Adrian is suffering because of what happened? He's too proud to call you himself, but he knows he's to blame. A man is the master of his destiny, Melanie shot back, the words tumbling out before she could even think, and quickened her pace, determined to leave the conversation behind her. Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Sullivan sat in the spacious kitchen of her son's apartment, leisurely spreading butter on a piece of bread. Caitlin, dear, would you mind making me some tea? I'm in the mood for something warm to drink, she asked, her voice laced with a gentle request. Of course I will, Caitlin replied, though her tone carried a hint of irritation. But it's just surprising you do everything yourself, and now you're asking me to do it. Caitlin, Mrs. Sullivan began, her voice softening. Sometimes I just want to be taken care of, like when I'm in a cafe. I rarely go to such places, you know. We don't have much variety in my small town. So what's stopping you from going to a cafe or restaurant more often? Caitlin responded, her words brisk. Brandon and I go out all the time. Yes, I'm sure you do, Mrs. Sullivan agreed. A woman who lives across from you recommended a cafe nearby. What was the name? Oh yes, Just Pizza. She said the food is tasty and the prices are reasonable. Do you think it's worth visiting? I'm shocked she would suggest that, Caitlin replied, her nose wrinkling in distaste. It's a youth cafe, there's constant noise, and the staff can be quite rude. No, not a place you'd enjoy. Have you been there? Caitlin, Mrs. Sullivan asked, her curiosity piqued. I've been there once, and that was enough, Caitlin said dismissively. Thanks for the suggestion, dear, but I'm going out for a walk now. Mom, where are you headed? Brandon asked as he saw his mother preparing to leave. Yes, son, I'm going out, she replied calmly. Would you mind driving me? It's not far, but I could use the company. With Caitlin's eyes following them, Brandon reluctantly agreed and escorted his mother out of the apartment. Mom, I'm starving. I was planning to have lunch at home, Brandon said, his voice edged with nervousness. Don't worry, son, Mrs. Sullivan replied, patting his arm reassuringly. You'll eat in just a few minutes. I just needed an excuse to talk to you alone. Let's sit on that bench over there. Brandon sighed, sensing the seriousness in her tone. I know what this is about, Mom. You're going to interrogate me like you used to do when I was a kid. Brandon, as a former senior investigator, I never interrogated you, Mrs. Sullivan replied with a small smile. But this time, I'm afraid it's necessary. The future of your only son and my only grandchild is at stake. So tell me, why did you ruin Adrian and Melanie's wedding? Brandon looked at his mother, exasperated. Mom, what are you talking about? You know Melanie refused to marry Adrian when he told her he was broke and working as a taxi driver. Mrs. Sullivan's gaze didn't waver. That's not all, Brandon, she said, her voice steady. She was also accused of flirting with a stranger behind Adrian's back before the wedding. We saw and heard everything. But I want to know the truth. Did you think that justifies what happened? Do you believe Melanie deserved to be humiliated like that? Brandon shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence faltering under his mother's intense scrutiny. Mom, it wasn't just about the money or the stranger. There were other things. Adrian felt like Melanie wasn't taking the marriage seriously. He thought she was using him. Mrs. Sullivan shook her head, her expression a mix of disappointment and sorrow. And did you ever consider that maybe Melanie was just scared? That maybe she needed support, not judgment? Brandon didn't answer, his thoughts swirling with the weight of his mother's words. The realization that there might have been more to the story than he had considered began to dawn on him, but he wasn't ready to face it yet. Instead, he looked away, avoiding his mother's piercing gaze. Brandon, Mrs. Sullivan said softly, it's not too late to make things right. Sometimes, all it takes is a little understanding and a little kindness. Think about it, son, before it's too late. With that, Mrs. Sullivan stood up, leaving Brandon to sit in silence, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. And why did you and Caitlin, who are regulars at expensive restaurants, decide to go to such a cheap youth cafe, Mrs. Sullivan asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and suspicion. I was genuinely surprised that you would choose such a place, but I didn't say anything at the time. And what a coincidence that you just happened to find 2 free tables in a crowded cafe. Brandon's face hardened as he replied, Yes, Mom, we saved our son from that deceitful girl, and now he's marrying a good woman from a respectable and affluent family. I'll be proud to have ties with her father. Mrs. Sullivan didn't miss the tension in his voice. Brandon, why are you so worried and stressed all the time? I'm still alive. Your son is marrying a good girl, yet you're always on edge. Tell me the truth. Brandon hesitated, then sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping as he finally admitted, Well, if you want the truth, here it is. I invested a large sum of money into a business venture and lost it. We're barely scraping by to cover the debts, and with the wedding expenses looming. Everything is incredibly difficult. The Mrs. Sullivan's eyes widened in disbelief. Why would you go ahead with an expensive wedding in such difficult circumstances and plunge yourself even deeper into debt? Wouldn't Adrian have understood your situation? No, Mum, Brandon replied, frustration creeping into his voice. Caitlin believes that if we throw a grand wedding, then Nicholas Crystal's father will think better of us and treat us more favorably in the future. Mrs. Sullivan's expression turned stern. Don't ruin your life or Adrian's by trying to live up to someone else's expectations. It won't end well. You need to break free from Caitlin's influence. She's manipulating you like a puppet. By the way, I met Melanie yesterday. By chance. She's working as a saleswoman at her parents' store. I have a good sense for people, Brandon, and I can tell you that she's an honest girl who simply got caught up in a difficult situation. Brandon was already halfway out of his seat, eager to escape the conversation. Mum, I don't want to hear this, he muttered, his voice tight with impatience. Wait, Mrs. Sullivan's voice was firm, stopping him in his tracks. She explained to me why she reacted the way she did and ran off. Honestly, if your father had pulled a stunt like that on me, I would have hit him with a frying pan. And let's not forget, Melanie's father only just started recovering from the stroke he suffered after your so-called lesson. If you're so concerned about money, why don't you have Adrian sign a prenuptial agreement instead of turning everything into a circus? Brandon looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes. I heard about Melanie's father, and I'm truly sorry for what happened. But Adrian offered him money to help with the expenses, and he refused. We thought it would be a good lesson for Adrian to find out who stands by you for love and who does so for money. Mrs. Sullivan's lips tightened into a thin line. Maybe you should test Caitlin the same way. Yesterday I saw a receipt fall out of her purse. She bought herself another leather coat. The amount was staggering, Brandon. Now I understand why you're having financial problems. I could live comfortably for half a year on what she spent in one day. Mom, enough, Brandon said, his voice rising in frustration. Stop accusing us. Adrian's wedding is going ahead as planned. He's busy preparing for the celebration. Yes, I see how busy he is, Mrs. Sullivan retorted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. He's so busy that he's turned pale, sitting in front of his laptop all day without even taking time to eat. Mum, he's an IT specialist. That's why he's always at the computer, Brandon replied, trying to brush off her concerns. Mrs. Sullivan sighed deeply, clearly frustrated but knowing there was little she could say to change her son's mind. Fine, do what you think is best. Go and eat. We'll talk tonight. As Brandon left, Mrs. Sullivan wasted no time. She called a taxi and headed straight to the store where Melanie worked. When she arrived, she confided in Melanie about her suspicions and urged her to meet again with the man to whom Caitlin had claimed Melanie confessed her love. Initially, Melanie resisted the idea. It felt too absurd, too painful to revisit that chapter of her life. But Mrs. Sullivan was persistent, convincing Melanie that this meeting could expose a serious moral wrongdoing, one that could impact not only the future of Mrs. Sullivan's family, but perhaps Melanie's future as well. Despite her initial doubts, Melanie found herself swayed by the older woman's determination and the unexpected warmth in her eyes. After an hour of conversation, Melanie's doubts began to fade, replaced by a reluctant agreement to meet with the man in question. Later that day, she called Mrs. Sullivan to inform her that the meeting was arranged. Mrs. Sullivan's voice was calm but held an underlying sense of urgency as she thanked Melanie and promised to handle the rest. That evening, Mrs. Sullivan gathered Brandon, Caitlin, and Adrian in the living room, her demeanor uncharacteristically solemn. "My dear ones," she began, her voice steady, "tomorrow marks exactly 45 years since I started my career in the police force. To honor this milestone, I would like to invite all of you to a restaurant to celebrate." The room fell silent as the family members exchanged glances, sensing that there was more to her invitation than a simple celebration. But none of them dared to ask, knowing that Mrs. Sullivan always had a plan, and whatever it was, they would find out soon enough. At the appointed hour, the entire family gathered at a cozy cafe table, surrounded by the warm ambience of the elegant restaurant. The establishment was quiet, with only a few other patrons scattered throughout the space, allowing the family to engage in easy conversation as they savored the various delicacies in front of them. Mrs. Sullivan, ever the storyteller, regaled Adrian with tales of his father's childhood, how Brandon had been a curious and lively boy, always eager to explore and learn. She recounted his hobbies, his mischievous adventures, and the little quirks that made him who he was. Naturally, she also sprinkled in a few anecdotes from her days as an investigator, weaving in lessons of truth and justice that seemed to resonate in the air around them. After a few rounds of drinks, Caitlin, emboldened by the alcohol, suddenly turned to her mother-in-law and asked, "Tell me, where did you get the money for this restaurant? It's a very exquisite and expensive place. Don't get me wrong, I'm just curious." Mrs. Sullivan met her gaze with calm dignity, her voice steady and clear, without a hint of the embarrassment that both her son and grandson were visibly feeling. "Don't worry, Caitlin dear. We're spending my hard-earned money. I've been blessed with a good pension, and thanks to my son's regular help, I've managed to save a decent sum in the bank. This money will be enough for Brandon to pay off his debts, and for Adrian to avoid marrying a girl he doesn't love, one you picked out for him." Adrian nearly choked on his cocktail, his face flushing with shock. He had only ever confided his doubts about the marriage to his close friend Marcus. How on earth could his grandmother know all of this? Brandon sat frozen, utterly stunned by his mother's bluntness, unable to find the words to respond. Caitlin's breath came in quick, angry bursts, and she looked ready to launch into a full-blown confrontation. Mrs. Sullivan, unfazed, continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I've lived many years on this earth, and it didn't take long for me to realize that someone was exerting undue pressure on both my son and Adrian. Some people prefer to solve their problems at the expense of others, but that's not the path for you, Adrian. I know you to be an honest man. But you've been swayed by your mother, who, by the way, has no problem indulging in her 25th Himalayan goat fur coat while your family is struggling with financial issues." "How dare you speak to me like that?" Caitlin exploded, rising to her feet and throwing her crumpled napkin onto the table in fury. "Sit down and calm yourself, Mrs. Sullivan ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Then, turning to the doorway, she called out, "Melanie, come in." To everyone's surprise, Melanie entered the restaurant, accompanied by a young man no one recognized. Mrs. Sullivan's expression remained composed as she addressed the family. I invited some guests to our wonderful celebration, a celebration of truth, honesty, and justice. She turned her gaze back to Caitlin, whose face was flushed with anger and fear. Caitlin, don't you think it's time to tell everyone how you orchestrated that meeting between this young man and Melanie? How did you arrange for those two tables at the cafe and drag Brandon along to witness the supposed evidence? Caitlin looked at her mother-in-law with wild eyes, her mind racing as she tried to figure out a way to salvage the situation. Adrian, meanwhile, stared at Melanie with a mixture of guilt and shame. He couldn't believe how easily he had been manipulated, how readily he had bought into his mother's lies and participated in this cruel charade. The unknown young man, seeing the turmoil his actions had caused, finally spoke up, his voice filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry this happened," he said, his eyes full of regret as he looked at Adrian and Brandon. "I was in a tight spot financially, and Caitlin offered me a way to earn some quick cash. She asked me to provoke Melanie, to get her to say things that could be twisted into evidence of infidelity. I never would have come here today if I hadn't learned that Melanie's father had a stroke because of the shock at the wedding. Please forgive me," he added, lowering his eyes to the floor before turning and leaving the cafe. Melanie stood behind Mrs. Sullivan, tears streaming down her face, unable to hold back the pain and humiliation she had carried for so long. The silence that followed was deafening, finally broken by Brandon's anguished voice. "Why, Caitlin?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why did you lie to everyone? Why did you convince us that our son's bride was a traitor? And when Adrian didn't believe it, why did you come up with such a vile plan to test her? How could I have been so blind, so stupid to go along with this madness? I don't want to see you anymore." "Wait, don't do this because of me," Melanie cried out, rushing to the table as if propelled by an unseen force. "Please, don't argue because of me. I'm not worth it. Adrian, I'm so sorry that I didn't appreciate you as I should have. I just never expected such a cruel test on what should have been the happiest day of our lives." She wiped away her tears, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions, before turning and heading for the exit. Adrian didn't hesitate. He shot up from his seat and ran after her, desperation etched across his face. "Forgive me, Melanie," he called out as he caught up to her. "Forgive me for my father's actions, for believing my mother's lies like a fool. Please, let's talk. We need to talk." Melanie and Adrian left the cafe together, their figures disappearing into the night as the door swung shut behind them, leaving Brandon, Mrs. Sullivan, and Caitlin sitting at the table in stunned silence. Mrs. Sullivan watched her grandson and Melanie leave, a faint, bittersweet smile playing on her lips. She turned to Brandon, who sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. Caitlin, on the other hand, sat rigid, her face pale with fury and humiliation. "Brandon," Mrs. Sullivan said softly, her voice filled with both sadness and resolve, "I hope you understand now. This isn't just about money or appearances. It's about doing what's right for those you love, even when it's difficult. It's time to put an end to this madness before it destroys everything that truly matters." Brandon looked up at his mother, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame. He nodded slowly, finally grasping the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. Caitlin, however, said nothing, her mind reeling from the public unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. As the silence stretched on, Mrs. Sullivan quietly signaled the waiter for the bill, her mind already turning to the conversations that would need to happen in the days to come. There was much to be resolved, but for tonight, the first steps had been taken. "According to the laws of the genre, I should be buying a plane ticket and leaving right now," Mrs. Sullivan began, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience and unspoken truths. "But because I live far away, I'm asking you to bear with me for just a couple more weeks. I swear, I have no desire to be the cause of your family's breakdown. You can hate me, curse me however you want, it's your right. But please understand feelings and people's destinies aren't something to be trifled with. And I'm not just talking about Melanie and Adrian. Think about Crystal, that poor girl who believes she's loved, who thinks she's about to embark on a journey of happiness." She paused, letting her words sink in, before turning to Brandon, her expression softening. "Brandon, there's something I never wanted to tell you, but perhaps the time has finally come. I loved your father deeply, more than I can ever express, but he didn't love me back, not because I was bad or he was bad, but for a completely different reason. Our parents didn't allow him to marry the woman he truly loved, and in defiance, he hastily married me. On our wedding day, I was the happiest person on earth. I rejoiced, I dreamed, I eagerly awaited your birth. But your father, while he physically lived with me, his heart was always with her. Until the day he died, he thought of that woman. You can't imagine the pain of knowing, for your entire life, that you're not the one and only, but merely a good mother and wife. That's why I often threw myself into work, why I tried to forget, to bury myself in diplomas and titles. But I could never attain the one thing I truly desired: reciprocated love. So please forgive me, son, if I couldn't give you all the motherly love you deserved. Mrs. Sullivan's voice trembled as she finished, and she reached out, gripping Brandon's hand tightly, her eyes filled with a lifetime of unspoken pain. She sighed heavily, the weight of her confession lifting from her shoulders. Brandon, shocked by his mother's revelation, asked softly, "Mum, why are you telling me all of this now?" Because there was no reason to before, she replied, her voice steady. But now the time has come. Before Brandon could respond, Caitlin, who had been silently processing everything, suddenly broke down. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've completely lost control of myself." Mrs. Sullivan looked at her, her expression gentle, and reached out to take both Brandon and Caitlin's hands. She joined them together, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Everything will be fine," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet confidence and hope. As the family sat in a moment of shared understanding, the waiter approached, preparing to ask if they were ready for the bill. But before he could speak, a tall figure appeared behind him. It was Adrian. He stepped forward, his expression a mix of determination and relief. "I have 2 pieces of news for you," Adrian announced, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Dear parents, Grandma pardoned the senior investigator for hard cases, but let me start with the good news. My carefully chosen bride, Crystal, has decided to leave for London to study. As a result, the wedding is cancelled by her choice, by the way." Adrian paused, letting the news settle before continuing with a smile. "And the second news is even better. Melanie and I have decided we want to get married, this time for real. I want to clarify what we want is to get married, not have some outrageously expensive wedding. So, who's in favor? Raise your hand." Without hesitation, Brandon, Caitlin, and Mrs. Sullivan raised both hands, their faces lighting up with joy. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they laughed together, genuine, heartfelt laughter that echoed through the cafe, filled with relief and newfound understanding. At that moment, it was clear that the family had finally reached a place of mutual understanding and acceptance. The burdens of the past were beginning to lift, and a brighter, more hopeful future lay ahead. As we come to the end of this video, we hope you've gained valuable insights and knowledge. What have you learned so far? We'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to share one thing you've learned and how you plan to put it into practice in your life. Your feedback is important to us, and it helps create a community of learners who inspire each other. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.